Most people imagine torture as something loud, dramatic, and visible. They think of screams, resistance, and physical domination. That fantasy is comforting because it feels distant from ordinary life. But real psychological destruction is quiet. It happens in silence, in the absence of reaction, in the slow starvation of meaning. The most effective form of torture for a narcissist is not pain inflicted from the outside, but exposure from the inside. You do not strike them. You do not argue your case. You simply stop carrying the weight of their inner world. You let their own psyche turn inward, where there is nothing solid to hold on to. This is not revenge. It is entropy applied to a false structure that cannot sustain itself. Carl Jung understood that the shadow contains everything we refuse to acknowledge about ourselves. For most people, encountering the shadow is frightening, but ultimately transformative. For a narcissist, it is catastrophic. Their entire personality is organized around avoiding that encounter at all costs. They have constructed a life devoted to fleeing self-awareness, outsourcing their worth, and burying their shame beneath admiration and control. When that system is disrupted, they do not adapt, they fracture. What you are about to do is not aggressive, it is surgical. You are removing the external supports that hold up an internal lie. When those supports disappear, the collapse is not dramatic. It is slow, humiliating, and psychologically devastating. This process is not about anger or justice. It is about reality reasserting itself. Narcissists live inside a private universe where they are central, exceptional, and misunderstood by lesser minds. That universe only exists because other people agree to participate in it. When participation ends, the universe dissolves. The narcissist experiences this not as loss, but as annihilation. They cannot tolerate neutrality because neutrality offers no reflection. Without reflection, they feel unreal. That is why disengagement is so powerful. You are not attacking them. You are removing the audience. And without an audience, their performance becomes meaningless noise echoing in an empty room. The first method begins with removing their throne, the symbolic center they occupy in your inner life. Power for a narcissist is not money or authority. It is psychological gravity. They need to be the reference point around which your thoughts, emotions, and decisions orbit. Your anticipation, your anxiety, your constant monitoring of their moods is what crowns them. The moment you stop organizing your internal world around them, the throne disappears. This is not visible at first. There is no announcement. But internally, something radical shifts. You no longer scan their face for cues. You no longer brace yourself for impact. Their emotional weather no longer determines your climate. In Jungian terms, attention is libido, psychic energy that animates what it touches. Where your attention goes, life flows. For years, your libido has been hijacked and redirected toward managing, soothing, understanding, and surviving the narcissist. That energy has not been neutral. It has been the fuel that kept their false self operational. Every text analyzed, every tone interpreted, every night spent replaying conversations has been a quiet donation to their psychological survival. When you withdraw that energy, they experience something close to withdrawal symptoms. They become restless, irritable, confused. They cannot articulate why, but something essential is missing. The power source has been unplugged. This withdrawal must be real. Pretended indifference does not work. Narcissists are acutely sensitive to emotional undercurrents. They detect tension, resentment, longing, and suppressed rage with uncanny accuracy. If you are silent but emotionally charged, they still feel fed. Negative attention still confirms their significance. To truly remove the throne, you must internally demote them. That requires grief. You grieve not the person they are, but the person you believe they could be. You mourn the projection you invested in them, the fantasy that kept you hoping. Only when that image dies does indifference become authentic. Grieving the imago is one of the most painful psychological tasks. You must accept that the nurturing parent, the devoted partner, or the reliable protector you imagined never existed. What existed was a mask designed to attract your projection. When that realization fully lands, anger fades, rage dissolves. What remains is a heavy, sober clarity. You no longer want them to change. You no longer want recognition. You no longer need resolution. This emotional neutrality is what terrifies them. They cannot provoke it, cannot manipulate it, cannot control it. It is a dead zone where their usual tactics fail. When this shift occurs, your behavior changes effortlessly. There is no strategy, no script. Their bad moods no longer register as emergencies. Their accusations no longer demand defense. Their provocations fall flat. They escalate, expecting engagement, but encounter calm detachment instead. This forces them to hold their own emotions for the first time. Anxiety has nowhere to go. Shame cannot be exported. The internal chaos they once deposited into you rebounds inward. This is unbearable for them. Their entire psychology depends on external regulation. Without it, they feel exposed, hollow, and destabilized. The throne is gone, and with it, their sense of orientation. Once the throne is removed, the second method begins naturally, shattering the illusion. This is not done through confrontation. Direct attacks only strengthen their defenses. The illusion collapses when it is no longer reinforced. The narcissist's false self is a rigid persona, an idealized identity constructed to hide profound inadequacy. They do not see this persona as a role. They believe it is who they are. Any threat to it is experienced as an existential danger. That is why criticism enrages them. But calm reality is far more dangerous than criticism. Reality offers no emotional leverage to fight against. You shatter the illusion by becoming a neutral mirror. You stop arguing narratives and start reflecting facts, not with sarcasm, not with contempt, with calm precision. When they exaggerate, you acknowledge without enthusiasm. When they rewrite history, you restate events plainly. When they seek admiration, you respond with proportion. This creates cognitive dissonance. Their internal story of superiority clashes with the unembellished reality you present. Because you are not emotional, they cannot discredit you as unstable or abusive. There is no drama to deflect with. The mask begins to slip because it is no longer being upheld by your belief. The third method emerges as a consequence of this collapse, refusing to absorb their projections. Narcissists survive by exporting their inner pain. They assign you the role of aggressor, burden, or failure so they can remain pure. When you accept these projections, you help them avoid self-confrontation. When you calmly refuse them, they are forced to carry their own psychic weight. You do this by not defending yourself against accusations designed to provoke guilt. You do not argue your innocence. You simply do not accept the role. Their words fall into empty space. The projection returns to its source. This refusal destabilizes them deeply. Without a container for their shame, they experience mounting internal pressure. They may escalate into rage, victimhood, or grandiosity. Each tactic is an attempt to restore the old dynamic. You remain steady. This steadiness is not passive. It is active psychological resistance. You are no longer participating in the unconscious contract that sustained them. Over time, their behavior becomes more erratic, more revealing. The cracks widen. Others begin to see what you no longer conceal. You are not exposing them. You are simply no longer covering for them. The fourth and final method is time. Consistency without emotional re-engagement is intolerable to a narcissist. They can survive confrontation. They can survive abandonment if it fuels a narrative. What they cannot survive is prolonged irrelevance. When months pass without supply, without reaction, without emotional access, the false self deteriorates. Depression, paranoia, or desperate attempts to regain control often follow. This is not because you did anything to them. It is because the structure they lived inside required constant external maintenance. You stopped providing it. This is where the roles reverse. You regain clarity, energy, and self-trust. They lose coherence. You stop orbiting. They spin. This is not cruelty. It is consequence. You did not destroy them. You stepped out of the illusion, and illusions do not survive contact with reality. By reclaiming your attention, your boundaries, and your inner life, you do not just heal. You dismantle the system that depended on your sacrifice. For you, this is freedom. For them, it is psychological suffocation. And it begins quietly the moment you stop caring. They need constant validation to maintain their fragile sense of self. Every brag, every accusation, every attempt at manipulation is a test. Will you reinforce their narrative or will you refuse? When you calmly refuse, when you look at reality without drama, you do not argue, you fracture. A narcissistic injury is not superficial. It is a deep, structural crack in the psyche. They know, somewhere buried beneath the mask, that they are not what they pretend to be. When you gently mirror reality back to them, they are forced to confront the shadow they have spent a lifetime avoiding. Their insecurities, dependencies, and shame collide with the persona they cling to, and the collision is unbearable, destabilizing, and quietly devastating. This approach works in every context, even with covert narcissists who hide behind martyrdom, humility, or feigned suffering. When a narcissistic parent complains of abandonment, the immediate impulse is guilt. You rush to apologize, to placate, to make the drama go away, but that feeds the illusion, prolongs the deception, and reinforces their false self. By stating objective facts, I visited 3 times last week and you spent most of it on the phone. Without emotion, you remove the stage lighting from their performance. They cannot manipulate the truth if it stands unadorned. This is not about convincing them. It is about presenting reality consistently, calmly, without investment. The illusion cannot survive this steady exposure. As the mask begins to crack, an extinction burst often follows. The narcissist's reaction can be extreme, aggressive, and terrifying. They may lash out verbally, attempt to humiliate you, or spread false narratives to regain control. This is a natural defense mechanism, a desperate attempt to restore the psychological order they rely on. But these outbursts are proof of progress. Rage confirms you are striking at the underlying structure of their false self. Emotional detachment is crucial. Witnessing their tantrums without fear transforms their chaos into impotence. By holding neutrality, you deny them the reaction they require, leaving them exposed, vulnerable, and frustrated. You do not need to fight. Their own mind does the work. Way 3, becoming untouchable, emerges from internal individuation, a process Jung described as reclaiming wholeness and sovereignty. Untouchable is not coldness. It is impermeability. Insults, guilt traps, or anger no longer reach you because there is no longer any resonance within to exploit. For a narcissist, this is devastating. They have always assumed you exist to serve their ego. You were never independent, never an entity with your own boundaries, your own goals, your own worth. Individuation severs this assumption. You no longer supply the energy that inflates their superiority. This withdrawal of psychic fuel is imperceptible at first, but lethal in effect. The narcissist experiences a loss of control and relevance simultaneously, which feels like suffocation. A critical aspect of this untouchability involves reclaiming the golden shadow, the positive qualities projected onto them. For years, you may have minimized your own competence, intelligence, or resilience, admiring these traits in them instead. Individuation requires reclaiming these qualities and recognizing them as yours. As you internalize your own power, the narcissist diminishes in your perception. The projected authority, strength, and wisdom they once enjoyed through your validation evaporate. They are left with the emptiness of their own false self. The subtle horror they experience comes from witnessing the withdrawal of admiration they believed was rightfully theirs. Your reclamation of self-worth is their invisible psychological torture. This process extends into every sphere of life: career, relationships, personal achievements. Narcissists cannot tolerate your growth because it disrupts the hierarchy on which they depend. When you succeed, they attempt to diminish your accomplishments with envy, backhanded compliments, or false attributions. What once would have wounded you now passes like a shadow. You see their devaluation not as truth, but as envy manifesting. Your work, Your effort and your competence are acknowledged internally, not dependent on their flawed assessment. This independence is liberation. Your joy, your resilience, and your achievements illuminate the void in their own interior. They hate it because it proves they are unnecessary, uncentral, and ultimately irrelevant to your flourishing. You accept that having needs does not make you defective or immoral. You accept that you are complex, contradictory, and human. When this acceptance settles into your nervous system, the old hooks dissolve. Accusations that once pierced you now land on empty ground. The narcissist calls you selfish, and there is no internal protest, no urge to explain or justify. The words pass through you without resistance. You may even acknowledge them calmly, not sarcastically, not defensively, but neutrally. This neutrality is unbearable to them because it deprives the accusation of its function. There is nothing to grip, no wound to reopen, no shame to activate. The mechanism fails, and they feel it immediately. This failure drives escalation. When the usual tools stop working, the narcissist searches desperately for another point of entry. They may resurrect old mistakes, distort past events, or attack people you love, hoping to destabilize you indirectly. But individuation has shifted your center of gravity. You are no longer anchored to their version of your history. You are anchored to your present reality. Their narrative no longer defines you. Each attempt to wound reveals their increasing desperation. They are not trying to communicate. They are trying to regain access. And every time you remain grounded, you reinforce the truth that access is gone. As you become untouchable, a deeper dynamic collapses. In the past, the narcissist used you to regulate their emotions. This is projective identification. They felt rage, so they provoked rage in you, then felt relief watching you carry it. They felt shame, so they shamed you until you embodied it for them. When you refuse these projections, the emotional transaction fails. They arrive furious and you remain calm. The emotion has nowhere to go. It rebounds inward. For the first time, they must sit with what they feel. This is intolerable. They have no internal structure to metabolize emotion without exporting it. When rage no longer works, many narcissists regress. They abandon dominance and attempt helplessness. They speak in the language of dependency, invoking guilt and obligation. They imply that you are essential to their survival, that without you they are lost. This is not vulnerability. It is manipulation through regression. Individuation allows you to see the difference. You can feel compassion without collapsing your boundaries. You do not rush to rescue. You do not become their parent or savior. You respond with clarity and firmness, placing responsibility back where it belongs. This refusal to merge is devastating because it confirms what they fear most. They are on their own. By becoming untouchable, you transform the relationship into one-way glass. You see clearly without distortion. You recognize patterns, defenses, and wounds without being pulled into them. They, however, cannot reach you. They cannot provoke you into reaction or guilt. You are no longer participating in their internal economy. You have exited the role they assigned you. This absence leaves a void in their world. Where you once stood as a source of regulation and validation, there is now emptiness. Every glance at that empty space reminds them that control has limits and people are not extensions of their will. This realization brings us to the final method, cutting the supply. Narcissistic supply is not vanity. It is oxygen. Without it, the narcissistic structure destabilizes rapidly. Supply is any reaction that confirms impact. Admiration, fear, anger, tears. It proves they exist and matter. When you remove all reaction, positive and negative, you do something radical. You withdraw confirmation itself. This is not punishment. It is non-participation. Emotional neutrality removes the mirror the narcissist needs to recognize themselves. Without reflection, they experience existential panic. Their thoughts loop. Their identity blurs. The mask no longer feels real without witnesses. True neutrality is not silence fueled by resentment. It is internal stillness. Insults receive no defense. Charm receives no reward. you respond, if at all, with flat, factual minimalism. This emptiness is unbearable because it forces the narcissist to rely on internal resources they never developed. The persona collapses without an audience. The actor remains on stage, delivering lines to an empty room. The performance continues, but the meaning is gone. This is where the distress deepens from frustration into disorientation. The damage intensifies when this neutrality extends beyond the private sphere. Narcissists survive by compartmentalizing supply. Different audiences serve different functions, each seeing only the curated persona meant for them. You know the full picture. When you withdraw supply and exist quietly as someone who sees the whole truth, you become a living threat. Not because you expose them, but because you could. You do not warn them. You do not threaten. You simply exist as a witness who is no longer controlled. This ambiguity terrifies them. Silence cannot be predicted or countered. Because they are manipulative, they assume manipulation. Your neutrality becomes suspicious. They project strategy onto your stillness. They imagine plots where none exist. Their mind, trained in calculation, turns against itself. Paranoia grows. They monitor you, analyze your expressions, replay conversations. The dynamic reverses. Where you once walked on eggshells, they now scan for danger. Your calm becomes the source of their anxiety. Your lack of engagement becomes the center of their attention. This is the final inversion of power. Imagine a social setting, a family dinner or public gathering. The narcissist performs as usual, expecting reactions. You remain polite, distant, neutral. No admiration, no challenge, just presence without participation. To others, nothing seems wrong. To the narcissist, everything is wrong. The supply is gone, but the witness remains. This combination is intolerable. It strips them of control while confronting them with the possibility of exposure they cannot manage. And all of it happens without confrontation, without cruelty, without a single raised voice. They perform relentlessly, weaving a story where they are always heroic, always admirable, always indispensable. Perhaps they brag about charitable contributions, professional accolades, or social influence, each story meticulously crafted to maintain the illusion of superiority. You know with absolute certainty that the narrative is false, exaggerated, or at best self-serving. In that moment, the room becomes their stage, the audience their mirror. All eyes feed their persona, but yours does not. You meet their gaze with calm neutrality, a quiet acknowledgement of the truth. You do not interrupt, mock, or challenge. You simply exist as someone who sees the entire construction for what it is, holding the weight of reality like a still, unmovable presence. In that split second, their system reacts. Cortisol spikes, subtle panic ripples through their body, and awareness hits. You are the only observer who refuses to participate in their fantasy. They continue performing, but anxiety fractures their attention. They stutter, stumble, and their exaggerated confidence falters. Small inconsistencies emerge, lies contradict each other, and their manipulative charm diminishes. Jung's concept of the done mental becomes apparent. They are cognitively overwhelmed by the tension of their own complex, a lowering of mental acuity caused by emotional overload. Their brilliance in manipulation falters, leaving them sloppy, exposed, and increasingly frustrated as they attempt to maintain control. This state of exposure creates a double bind. They require your reaction to validate themselves, yet they cannot confront you fully for fear of repercussions. Any overt attack risks retaliation or social exposure. Any attempt to manipulate fails because you are untouchable, grounded, and detached. To compensate, they may resort to hoovering, a desperate bid to reestablish the connection. Suddenly, the person you knew as manipulative may become charming, apologetic, or seemingly vulnerable. They might manufacture crises, health scares, or emotional emergencies, all designed to trigger your empathy and reintroduce the emotional supply they crave. But these are not genuine acts of care. They are the desperate behaviors of an addict withdrawing from their most potent substance, your attention. Your reaction, or lack thereof, determines the outcome. If you yield, if you engage emotionally, the supply is restored and the cycle continues. But if you remain detached, polite, and neutral, their efforts produce exhaustion, not results. The absence of emotional fuel forces them to confront the hollowness inside themselves. Without external input, their mind becomes an echo chamber of unprocessed fear, shame, and dependence. They have no internal structure to maintain identity, no hobbies, no private joys, no inner life. They are hollow. The sustained silence reveals the immense energy required to uphold a false self, and you watch the cracks deepen. Their facade, so carefully maintained, begins to crumble under the weight of its own unreality. This depletion manifests physically and mentally. They may look older, weary, less composed. The strain of sustaining deception alone becomes visible in subtle ways: tighter facial expressions, distracted movements, or bursts of irritability at minor provocations. They carry the weight of a persona that was previously supported by your energy. Every lie now demands effort without reinforcement. This is not punishment. It is a natural consequence of a hollow system forced to function independently. By holding your ground, you do not intervene. You simply let the structure collapse organically. Your endurance becomes a mirror of stability, while their fragility is revealed, a quiet but devastating reversal of power. The final phase is what psychologists call narcissistic mortification, the internal collapse that occurs when projection fails, and the narcissist is left alone with the shadow they spent a lifetime avoiding. They have relied entirely on external sources to regulate self-esteem and define reality. Carl Jung described the shadow as the sum of all denied personal and collective psychic elements, those aspects incompatible with the conscious self. For the narcissist, the shadow contains inferiority, dependency, envy, and shame, all of which were continuously projected onto others. With your withdrawal, those projections return. They are confronted with the very parts of themselves they have spent a lifetime externalizing, and the psychic dissonance is unbearable. No yelling, no confrontation, no dramatic showdown is necessary. The collapse begins the moment they are forced to hold within themselves the chaos they once dumped into you. Alone, without supply, without validation, without the mirror of your attention, they experience the raw emptiness of their psyche. Mortification is not just embarrassment or shame. It is the profound existential realization that the edifice of their identity has no foundation. They are left staring into the void of their own unprocessed shadow. Every previous manipulation, every strategy, every performance is stripped of efficacy. The mind that relied on your engagement collapses under its own unsustainable architecture. You do not need to speak or act further. The event unfolds entirely within their own psyche. Their panic, frustration, and existential dread arise naturally from the absence of your participation. All the methods, the removal of your attention, the shattering of illusions, your untouchability, and the cutting of supply culminate in this final reckoning. The narcissist is forced to confront the emptiness of their own mind, the futility of their reliance on external validation, and the truth that without a host to project onto, they are nothing. It is the most profound and devastating consequence of non-participation, the collapse of a false self under the relentless weight of its own shadow. What you've written here is essentially the final act of the psychological dismantling of the narcissist. An elegant, almost surgical exposition of what happens when they are left entirely without the external validation that sustains them. The key takeaway is that you don't do anything overtly punitive. You don't attack, argue, or expose them. You simply stop playing the role they have relied on for survival, the container of their shadow, the supplier of emotional energy, and the audience for their grandiose performance. Once that role is vacated, their system collapses under the weight of what they've spent a lifetime avoiding. Their shadow, their repressed inadequacy, envy, malice, and shame cannot be held internally because their ego is too fragile. It spills outward through projection in normal circumstances, but once denied a recipient, it rebounds. They are forced to confront the totality of their unresolved internal chaos without the familiar distraction of scapegoating or manipulation. You become a silent witness rather than a participant. Your detachment is not cruelty, it is neutrality, a mirror that reflects only what they cannot see themselves, the emptiness behind the mask.